What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Slithering Salamanderscapes. Hope the summer's going great for you. I found this Repta-Habitat Zoom Ed tank on sale at one of the big box stores. Not a big fan of this, but it's just too cheap to pass up. So going to be putting together a vivarium for some woodland salamanders. Just going to do some measurements here so I can cut the A-crate light diffuser. As you can see, it's got a nifty little top that is pretty secure, which I do like these because of that, but just not too deep here in the front, but just taking some measurements about 4 or 5 inches to the top there in the front, but I'll build up the substrate towards the back. And not going to drill this tank just because the glass is, I don't want to say cheap, but it's just thin. I feel like I'll crack it if I try to drill it, so I'm going to build a false bottom and cut this PVC and drill out some holes on the bottom so I can siphon the water out with like a turkey baster. So just measuring, that's why I was measuring before. So as you can see, I drilled it and gouged out some holes there. Not too neat, but whatever, who cares. I'm just going to silicone this bad boy in there so we can have a place to remove the gross water that the vivarium will produce. So pretty simple, just going to silicone this here with some GE Silicone 1. And by the way, the reason why I am going to be building this is because I have some salamanders that are in a temporary habitat that a friend asked if he wanted to rehome them. So I said sure, but actually at first that's actually a lie. I said no way, I don't have any room. And finally he convinced me, and I picked them up on my way back from North Carolina. They are a really cool woodland species that does not live in the state I live in, so legal for me to have here. He collected these legally several years ago and just doesn't have the time commitment anymore to be able to properly take care of these. So anyhow, they are called gray cheek salamanders, and they are very common in Tennessee and North Carolina. I'm pretty sure that I'm not 100% sure of the range, but anyhow, that's what I'm going to be putting in. As you can see, just the basics here, just the measuring the A-crate light diffuser. I didn't want to come all the way to the front because I've had problems with the doors swinging into the background that I built. So you can see that false bottom PVC where I siphon the water out is now nice and solid. Anyways, the water will just go through those holes. But yeah, this is kind of the skeleton for the tank, so pretty simple. Again, have the room here, which is terrific. Then here I have all kinds of wood. I've got cork bark, spider wood. These pieces are too good. I have like I'm addicted to buying driftwood, so when I see a cool piece, I will go out, buy them from various pet stores. There's a really big tropical fish store that has some cool stuff, and you can buy the cork bark by the pound, or by the ounce, excuse me. So I have a lot of pieces here that may or may not, a lot of those big branches are just not going to fit in this thing, but some of these small pieces of cork bark I'm definitely going to be using. And like that piece of spiderwood, I'll end up using that in some kind of big aquatic setup at some point in the future. That's just not gonna fit in this little one. And even these massive pieces of cork bark, there's no way, unless I break them up. It's fun this hobby because you kind of start to accumulate stuff. I've even got branches from outside that I think are cool, so just keep things in boxes all over my basement to my wife's dismay. Here's some cool rocks that I've had for a while. These are slate, big chunks of it from my property out in West Virginia, so lots of rocks that I collect. Believe it or not, I actually spend a lot of time looking at rocks I want. That big one kind of stinks. I don't really like that. That actually came from a pet store, but I've got all this river pebble type stuff that I could put in. I've also got all kinds of dry pine needles, pine bark, which I love. This is again all from my property, so there's a ton of it. So when I remove it, it's not like I'm removing the entire ecosystem. But what I've done here is taken some great stuff, pond and stone, and I've just filled in some of the corners and places where I I'm gonna have to carve the foam and probably silicone with the GE silicone one, and then put a little cocoa fiber on, and then just working the background, just building a little wall here in the background. It looks terrible right now, but I promise it'll look better when I'm done. But just, it's like Tetris, you know, you're just kind of, or like a jigsaw puzzle, you're just kind of fitting pieces in, try not to have too much foam show, push the foam down where you can, and so on. And that's just really the whole process of building the background. And just you're gonna see the background come together here in chunks. Looks cool. I like it, but there's a lot of work to do. It takes a long time. People always ask me how long it takes. For me, I kind of just see it as I go, or I'm just remembering it from memory, or sometimes I'll take a picture. I was able to break some of that big cork bark here and foam that stuff in just to break up the monotony of all the rocks. I just don't want it to be that heavy, so I want to also use some cork bark and some driftwood and things like that, and some other branches. But the cork bark's nice because it kind of takes up a lot of space, and it just, you know, it, like I said, it's a nice contrast to the rocks. And I'm also putting some pine bark in, working in some ledges here and there. And if you can't tell, the tank is on its back. It's the only way you can really do this without losing your mind, because otherwise things will just fall, you get foam everywhere, and it's just a pain. So worked on the sides here, did some more cork bark, and you can see foam in places. I know it doesn't look pretty, but again, the cocoa fiber, and just working that into a couple spots here where I need to on the sides. Just see, it looks kind of natural. I mean, minus the foam. You know, once I move the foam out of there, it'll look better. But you know, just sometimes just pull it off with your hands is the easiest thing to do versus using a razor blade. You're gonna have to fill all that stuff in with either sphagnum moss or more cocoa fiber. So just vacuuming it up, just to see. I actually do this throughout the process just to see what doesn't stick, and then have to reapply the silicone or super glue, whatever I'm using. So as you can see, there's some rocks and cocoa fiber there. And here is kind of the background when it's done. I really like it. It came out pretty cool. It is gonna be pretty awesome to get the plants and moss and things like that in here. But just, there are some things I have to do. You can see there's foam showing through in a couple areas here. What you got to do is go through with super glue or more silicone. I have a lot of super glue. I can't remember what I was doing, but I must have bought like 10 little super glue bottles like an idiot, and I have them. And so I need to use them. So instead of using the silicone, I'm going to use a lot more super glue to just fill in kind of some of these crevices and gaps with some filler. Again, either some damp sphagnum moss or the cocoa fiber. And here it is, the Gorilla Glue. Things are pretty small, but it's good. It got some more of these gaps filled in with the cocoa fiber. Now I'm going to use this damp sphagnum moss. Just put it in like a little deli cup or something, wet it up with some dechlorinated water. And then you're just going to kind of jam it in, just break it into pieces, because a lot of it's all strung together, which is a little annoying, but you just work it into places where you see gaps and stuff where you don't want an animal getting, or you want to grow moss or a plant, because it does act as a growing medium, and it does make it look natural when you kind of fill in some of the gaps where there's foam and stuff. So you don't always have to keep siliconing and siliconing and siliconing. That just becomes crazy. So this is kind of what I do. I just randomly do it wherever I think it needs it, and it's not a pain. It's pretty easy to do this. This is actually kind of a fun part for me, because I can start to see the vision come together as the foam disappears and it looks more natural. So I think it looks pretty good. gotten a lot of areas covered. I used a little super glue in a couple areas too for the damp sphagnum moss. The water actually helps it cure quicker too, so it's nice. It gets pretty stuck in there and won't come out. So I think this looks pretty legit, and I am excited to start to do the false bottom, which is going to use these clay pebbles here, or Leco, whatever you want to call it. It's going to dump it in. I don't have a ton left, unfortunately, so I'm going to have to put some rocks in too, but I'm going to use all the rest of these hydro balls or clay balls and then dampen them. And then you see I can put some rocks and just put some screen in as well there, which goes around that PVC pipe where I'm going to siphon the water out. And I use those rocks just to have it stand up a little bit more. You always want to have a little more screen too on the sides, just so it doesn't fall through. As you can see there's just a little extra. No one's going to see it because the substrate is going to cover that all up completely, so no big deal. So I'm starting with some coconut fiber for the substrate, just pretty basic. Then I'm going to use this Reptisoil, which has some peat and some other things. I forget what the exact ingredients are, but I use this stuff and it works great. You can find organic topsoil too, but I have a harder time finding that stuff. Even when I go to garden centers and things like that, I just can't. It's always got some weird chemical in it. So there is a brand, and I'm forgetting the name, but it's hard to find. So I just use the Reptisoil a lot. Oh, and then don't forget the old sphagnum moss. Can't forget that. Dampen that up, spray it down with a sprayer. And then just soak it. And then just mix it up with your hands. I just do this as I go along. It's pretty easy. And by the way, for these animals, the substrate's really important. They're not like tiger salamanders or big mole salamanders species, but these animals do burrow quite a bit for being lungless salamanders. So what I do is I'm gonna take a lot of leaf litter and just crush it up, just dump a ton of leaves in here, and also put in some dried pine needles. Just mix it all up. Pine bark, which is great. If you have pine bark, it's one of the best things I think that you can add into a substrate for salamanders, at least kinds that are underground. And these animals live in pine forests, and I mean old growth, but also pine forests. So when I've seen them in the wild, there's just tons of them under the ground in that kind of substrate. So also smashed up some lump charcoal there just to keep it nice and clean. And then you're just going to put the substrate in there and just fill it up, as you can see here. Oh, one thing I would mention here is just put some filter floss or some filter mat in the thing so nothing can get in there. And then I'm using the rocks here to build structure under the ground. Again, where I saw these, there was a lot of rocks, a lot of pine needles, a lot of normal leaves from hardwoods. And I'm just trying to build structure there. I have a place to go, or maybe lay eggs one day. As you can see, I'm just building some hides. You're not going to see these hides when I'm done, but there are hides for these animals under all the plants and moss that I'm about to put in here. So it's important to kind of replicate the natural habitat that they have. So adding in some moss and some ferns here. I've also got this club moss stuff, which is pretty cool. I guess ground pine might be called. I can't remember, but I love this stuff. I have it growing in a couple of bins. It grows all over my property, like everywhere. So I always take a handful of this stuff, and I haven't really used it. Oh, by the way, that's where I'm hiding the thing to siphon the water out, the PVC. But I love the club moss or the ground pine, whatever one you want to call it. It's great. I have a ton more I'm going to put in here as well. And I do see these plants where these animals live. So that's why I want to incorporate it. And as you can see here, I've added tons of moss, more club pine, as you can see. I've also got some rotted wood, right there in the lower right, where I'm kind of zooming in, that is growing moss all over it. And I've had this in a bin for like 5 months, and it's just been doing great. And so some of the moss, temperate mosses are hard, but if it stays relatively humid, they do okay, but it just can't get too wet and it can't get too dry. It's kind of like a weird balancing act, but I really like the way this has turned out. It actually replicates a little bit where some of these animals live, There's just huge. They live on big slopes in the highland part of the mountains where I was in North Carolina. Saw a ton of them. Got some great pictures of ones in the wild, and so just really think that I've replicated the ground floor. So now I'm just going to put in some temperate springtails. There's actually some probably natural wild springtails in there already, and there's also some earthworms. But these are my cultures for springtails, and I put a ton of these in all over just to seed it and just make sure that they can eat mold and things like that as it grows. I've never had to reseed these things. I always find them everywhere. They're so hard to see though. They're tiny. Probably can't even see them right there. Just trying to get them in here. Let me get a better shot for you. As you can see, they're jumping all over the place. But springtails are great, and this is something you should definitely do. It helps clean the tank. I don't really have to clean other than wipe down the glass on occasion. Definitely put in isopods too. I'm going to try something different this time. I have a lot of salamanders that eat these white worms. I have a huge culture of white worms, and salamanders love these. And so I'm going to put clumps of these in throughout so they can just naturally find them. And they'll just continue to multiply in here. And so I think that's pretty smart. Can't finish a tank without the lid. So this lid clearly is tight fitting. It's what comes with Zoom Ed. But what I do is I tape it up, and I put this plastic on it to keep it humid and just keep it open a little bit in the front. And so as you can see there, I've got the little things that fit in the back if you have cords that go in. And then you're just going to kind of put these things in, and it will stay relatively humid. And so let's get these salamanders in. Here they are, great. If you watch my channel, you might know that I have red-legged salamanders, and these are very, very similar. They just don't have red legs. They almost look exactly the same, but they are just they're just called gray cheek, northern gray cheek salamanders. Again, very, very common where they're found, but really cool animals. I like them a lot. I saw a lot of these. The guy that I got these from, he's had them for a couple of years. He collected them legally, I believe, in North Carolina. I think you can collect up to 4 without having a permit. So that's what he did. And where I live, they don't live, so it's legal for me to have them here because they're not naturally found here. But these things are really cool. I've had them in quarantine for a while now. They've just been eating crickets and white worms, fruit flies, and a couple other isopods and things like that. But these things are really going to thrive in here, I think. I mean, they've been thriving in the bin I've had them in for a while. By the way, one thing I didn't mention is I took some substrate that the guy had as well. So there was some bacteria and some substrate that he had in his existing tank, and so I did incorporate that, and I just didn't mention it. I forgot to mention that when I was walking through the substrate. So that's in here too. So it keeps it it makes it a lot more likely that they will thrive because that existing bacteria is here, and it's important. It sounds stupid, but I've had cases where some of the salamanders have not done well, especially cave salamanders, when I introduced them to something that didn't have, it was like a new bacteria or whatever. And so certain species are more robust than others, but just something to keep in the back of your mind. But these guys are going to do great in here. I'm really excited. They're sitting on the floor right now in the tank. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to build a stand, but I don't even have any room, so not really sure maybe I have to expand my salamander room. Who knows? But anyways, thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed this build, and I appreciate all the support. So if you haven't, like, subscribe, and comment, and look forward to more content. Have a good one.